Good morning, and welcome to Best Practices for Supporting Students and Families from Multilingual Homes. My name is Stephanie Marquez. I'm a leadership coach for the Two-Way Immersion Network for Catholic Schools at the Roach Center for Catholic Education. The goals of the session are as follows: identify the families being served by our program. Identify what we already know about the families we serve in terms of their cultural context and their experiences. Learn which factors are important to consider in your school when developing partnerships with families. Identify the parental practices, beliefs, and goals of the family you have with regard to the child. Compare your own formation and teaching style to the expectations of the students and families at your school. And we'll look at a few strategies to connect with diverse families. And to begin by saying that we already know the benefits of establishing partnerships and family involvement. And research has demonstrated time and time again that the stronger involvement of families in the child education resulted in more success for the child at school. So, to understand the diverse needs and backgrounds, educators need to engage with families and learn about their language, culture, beliefs, and goals. We know that relationships need to be reciprocal, meaning educators need to learn about the families. And we also know that high quality early childhood programs involve families in all areas of services. And this means including families in the planning, curriculum, instruction, assessment, and intervention. So, research is as we repeat, families and parents and students greatly benefit from this involvement. And parents need to understand their role as educators more in terms of creating home environments that encourage learning. But as educators, we need to learn more of the social, cultural, and linguistic characteristics of our family in developing these relationships. So, and to get to the improved quality, the more support, increased learning, stronger bridges between home and the classroom needs to be built. We need to understand more about the socioeconomic, the cultural, the language exposure, and the immigration and transnationalism. And the family context is highly important in a child's development. So, because the role of early childhood educators is to work with the families to support their role as primary caregiver. And in return, this helps us in the classroom as our professional obligation to child formation. So we must work on establishing these relationships of mutual respect, cooperation, shared responsibility, and negotiation of conflicts. We need to learn to establish regular and frequent two-way communication, invite parents to observe, participate, and serve in the decision-making of roles of the program, and also inviting teachers to observe the role of the family and acknowledging parents' choices, goals for children while sharing our own professional responsibility. We also need to begin to share developmental information about children and assess how we're going to plan. The NAUIC guidelines provide a starting point for families. And we have to understand that families oftentimes have time restraints and different cultural expectations of the roles and teachers. For example, many families may display different levels of familiarity with schooling in the United States. They might have less experience with the education system in the United States. So the child's goals in the program will support, we could learn to support families and assist them with health, nutrition, and other services that are available. So, as we're working to establish these relationships, establish two-way communication, inviting parents to observe, acknowledging parents' decision, and sharing in the developmental information. This is going to lead to higher participation and acceptance. Another aspect of the communities to consider is the family engagement in their organizations around their area, such as where they worship, their religious, and it's even more critical for early childhood education to appreciate and value the contributions of the family in their development of their children, and make sure we make families feel supported, involved. And as we go through this and how to include, we'll learn more about the role of attachment and developmental process. So, in the attachment maternal responses in parenting styles, these can differ according to linguistic, cognitive, social development, and social competence. And there are different styles, but the different styles will lead to high levels of linguistic, cognitive, social development, and social competence. There is not one style according to the research that works. So, when we look at attachment theories, if you've taken any course in child development, you have probably heard of attachment theory. The attachment refers to the caregiver child relationship and the emotional bond created between the infant and the infant's caregiver. And the important part about this is based on the infant's response. When children are secure in their attachment, they're more free to explore and to play in different environments. And this is going to create a security within the child. Um, so, when we look at these theories, in social competence is a set of skills that include empathy, emotion regulation, perspective taking, cooperation, friendliness, and social problem skills. And a secure bond is considered a developmental process in which child develops positive social competence traits, where insecure bonds is considered a negative indicator of future confidence. This attachment was originally based on the middle class American parenting norms, in which the mother was the constant caregiver, but it has now been included to include multiple caregivers that develop. So, why is this important when working with dual language families and multilingual families? It is important to recognize that parenting practices and are culturally specific, and the types of attachment between parents and child may be different, be depending on the family's culture. So, for example, parent coping styles and attachment according to culture. If we look at Latin America, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, we'll notice that they're more collectivist societies, and we'll get into a little more about what that means for attachment in the socio-competence development of a child. And the United States, for example, stresses the role of the individual family as opposed to the collective society. Um, and the collective society relies more on the extended family and close family and friends to help in the child rearing and the co-parenting. And it's also important to note that they consider the teacher part of their family and part of the community, in contrast to individualistic societies such as the United States that promote more independence. So, as we're looking through in the social competence of collectivist society, it's primarily viewed as interdependent, including respecting each other, being calm, being kind, and in Spanish we call it bien educado, and knowing how to be obedient, having a proper demeanor when engaging others. And these traits are highly valued, particularly among Latin American communities. And research has shown that dual language students demonstrate strong social competence in preschool, do better on cognitive tasks such as math, and develop English proficiency faster than children with lower levels of social competence when they are in elementary school. Therefore, it's really important to value parenting's commitment to having children who are bien educado, because it has the positive long-term benefits on the child. Common traits are emphasizing harmony over individualism. And it is also evident when they ask about that teachers ask parents about their values. So, social competence in individualistic societies, this is much more to promote independence and autonomy. And this is considered like the gold standard of the US middle class parenting. Um, and this is really important to know the difference because both forms of attachment and parenting has shown to have high social competence in children. So, where should we actually take? We should talk about the situation with refugee children as we have more and more coming into our public and Catholic schools. And it is important to know with refugee children that they have a less secure bond. They have less secure attachments. Many times they have witnessed violence. They have possibly not seen their parents in many years. They have a general distrust. They have an underdeveloped social competence skills. Oftentimes, they speak languages that few other people speak. And it's really important to keep in mind that they are going to need more emotional support. They're going to need a safe space in the classroom, and they should stay with the same teacher for the whole year. Teachers need to be aware that it may take months or even a year. And I would go forward to say if it's possible to keep a child with the same teacher in loop for 2 years with our refugee children, that would be even more valuable. So as we go through a little bit with the responsiveness and the secure bonds and how they vary with culture, it was important to add in that refugee children sometimes don't have this secure bond, and that is going to create a more social insecurity and less social competence. So, early educators need to be aware of several important aspects of attachment because they're found to predict both cognitive and social development in young children. And so when we discuss the secure bond that promotes and creates social competence, the second important aspect is sensitivity. Sensitivity is or responsive to how the caregiver is. Now the term responsiveness is being used by researchers because it can be the father or another co-parent as the primary caregiver. And sociocultural researchers, has found that this sense of responsiveness varies across culture. For example, within the Euro-American culture, it's common for mothers to give up control and to follow the infant style. This style is modeled and promoted with sensitive and responsive, and it leads to greater social competence and increased development in young children. However, there are other styles that lead to the same level of social competence, even though it is a slightly different. Some cultures, parents tend to value control, directiveness, strictness when responding to their children. This is different, but it also leads to the same emotional growth and social development. So the goal is met by engaging high levels of physical prompting and control over the child. A different approach, but it still leads to the same sociocultural security and development in students. So promoting parental responsiveness in culturally and linguistic appropriate ways will help students develop social competence and strong oral skills. And so educators need to take a step back and absorb how parents interact with their children, because although in one culture it could be seen as controlling and over involved, it is still going to be recognizing the concept of bien educado, or recognizing the concept that it is different, but it's still going to promote the same high level of social development and educational advancement. So these conditions really affect parents and their children. So, as educators, I'll reiterate, it's important to understand the cultural variations in responsiveness and to promote parental responsiveness in a culturally linguistic ways that acknowledge and value. And to do this, you can observe how caregivers exhibit responsiveness and also value the strength in the relationship, as opposed to judging, because there are different ways to create highly social competent and academically strong children. Something that we do need to mention, that depression and anxiety is often a result of socioeconomic, and depressed parents are likely to respond to their children or take longer. So we need to be aware and be conscientious of the impact of what is happening with their children. So, and we're going to go on a little bit to understanding through the parenting lens of culture. So, a high quality parent child relationship is critical. Child development have, theorists have typically focused on authoritarian parenting style, authoritative parenting style, and permissive. And authoritative parents have emphasized structure, a consistency with the rules while also being caring. Permissive parents are child centered and lenient and have limited rules. Authoritative and authoritarian have been found to be the most effective. The one that does not work is the neglectful. And we also find with these style of parenting, we have also found that teachers tend to fall into the different styles. Okay. And if we look at the authoritative, parenting has also been considered, like we said, the norm among middle class Euro American families. And this is the style that most teachers use in their classroom. However, there was research conducted with African American, Caribbean, Black, and Latin American families that consistently identify authoritarian parenting as common. And parents within these cultural values, they value children that are bien educado, well behaved, and respectful to the elders. Culturally, these characteristics are the most important for young children to portray and commonly established through authoritarian parenting. And so it's important for early childhood educators to make sure that their style is aligned with the expectations of the family. And this can help increase the consistency of styles used across the home and classroom. Okay. And one of these, the factors beyond culture that often align are race, ethnicity, culture, and socioeconomic. Economic hardship may cause parents to appear less supportive, but that is not true. And we'll get into a little bit about how the anxiety of socioeconomic can affect parenting style, and how we can support families and how we can have them take an active role. Okay. In summary, children need to consider, teachers of early childhood children need to consider cultural influences on parenting and ethnicity in diverse families, and to see how not only the immediate family takes an active role, but in many cultures we'll see the extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and many people that we would consider to be in a Euro-American society, that it is considered the extended family are part of the role of the responsiveness. And we have seen through research that Latino parents are generally what would say more intrusive or authoritarian, and it's related to the role of the family and respect, two highly valued beliefs within the culture. And it's interesting when you look at some of the research recently has shown that Latino families move from being more permissive with their children when they're infants, and when they're toddlers becoming more authoritarian. And all of this is going to be important when you work with parents and families of multicultural, because you'll need a base of how to talk to parents, because understanding the cultural values and beliefs of diverse children is important in developing that reciprocal two-way communication and having conversations with families regarding their personal belief and values. Um, we're going to look a little bit, go through cultural values and beliefs are embedded into all the systems that directly impact the child's social and academic development. Here are some critical factors to keep in mind when working with families: socioeconomic background, culture and cultural competence, language exposure and use, parental beliefs and goals, immigration, and transnationalism. Socioeconomic background is very important to understand, because 58% of all dual language population live in low income families compared to 43% of non-dual language students. 26% of our families have less than a high school diploma compared to 6% of non-dual language or multilingual families. And this comes from the Migration Policy Institute, an analysis of the American Community Survey from 2011 to 2015. Research has found that more educated parents are the more educated parents and more likely than parents with less education to enroll their children. So we need to security and understand that the role of socioeconomics plays in early childhood. Okay, culture and cross-cultural competence, the ability to think, feel, and act in ways that acknowledge, respect, and build on ethnic, sociocultural, and linguistic diversity. Moreover, culture is dynamic, and cultural beliefs and behaviors are continuously changing on new information and experience. Understanding the role of culture in families and children require knowledge of the sociocultural context of the family, including information on the history, their ethnic characteristics, religion, family roles, values, and beliefs about child rearing and early childhood education, and how educators can better serve our families in our schools. This is a question that has to become very important for early childhood education educators as they strive to meet the needs. So once again, cross-cultural competence is defined as the ability to think, feel in ways that acknowledge, respect, and build on social, cultural, and linguistic diversity. And this comes from Lynch and Hansen in 1993. This definition was developed in the context of preparing service providers to work more effectively with families. The goal of cultural competency involves gaining knowledge of the diverse context and sociopolitical context the students and families live in, the climate of respect, acceptance, and caring. And it's a journey for service providers. Teachers should ask parents about their cultural and development goals for their students. And one thing to consider is your own cultural background and what influences beliefs, thinking about difference and similarities. Examine how their practices are reflective and responsive, and what type of parenting style and teaching style you have, and how that style can be talked about, and educators, when you reflect, and how it influences your interactions with others. I know doing this made me question how my thought process and how my value system was, and how the conversations that I could have with my families to become a more responsive teacher and more responsive school. And so in many programs, to data collected about the children's characteristics, but it's also critical to collect information relating to the family's culture, beliefs, values, and child development at an early education. And cultural diversity should be viewed as a strength, taking into consideration that there is not just one way to create responsive children. Okay. Language exposure and use. This is probably really interesting to look at because there are different milestones for children who learn two or more languages simultaneously. The simultaneously bilingual learner will typically reach the same milestone in both language. So, recommending for early childhood teachers, if students are from multilingual homes, do not be careful with just saying that there's a language delay, because where you may only see 100 words or maybe 200 or 300 words in the child that you're not hearing. And simultaneously bilingual learners are typically reach the same milestone in both languages at the same time. So the fascinating part for me is to know that students that grow up in multilingual homes, they know by the time they are 2 who speaks which language and with whom to speak it with. And it's very important that students are encouraged to speak both of their languages, and that the parent should be encouraged to speak their home language. And in addition to just speaking, and book reading is also highly important as it introduces more complex language and syntax. And remember that simultaneous bilingual learners um, will process both information. And so even though you could think you're seeing a minor delay, but the delay is actually not a delay. And so this is very important to know that it could take a little bit more time, but there are simultaneously bilingual students are developing two languages. And if there's a second type of children who are not exposed to a second language until preschool. They're called sequential bilinguals. These students will need more learning support in their second language, but should continue to be encouraged to interact in their whole language and in their cultural communities in their first language. And research has shown that the more children are exposed to and use the first language, the easier it is for them to acquire their second language. Communicating this to parents is important, as this is oftentimes when families are confused at what language to speak, and with their children to turn to their teacher for assistance. Many foundational language skills are universal, and therefore they can be helpful when learning the second language. This is often referred to as cross-language transfer of skills, and in addition, because it takes 5 to 7 years to learn a language, most young children who are sequential bilinguals are still learning their first language when they're introduced to the second language. And in this case, it's essential that educators encourage parents to continue supporting their home language with their child. And research has shown the more children are exposed to and use their first language, the easier it is to them to acquire their second. Parents should be encouraged to speak in their first language. Remember that skills transfer, and it will be more beneficial to the student learning their second language. Parental beliefs and goals. And this is also an interesting concept to consider in early childhood. Beliefs and goals vary by culture, and they are deeply individual experiences that are rooted in culture and traditions. And so understanding that this varies in responsiveness, language, culture, responsiveness, parenting styles, they vary. And it's important to have direct conversations so you can clear misconceptions that parents have about school development, or that schools have about parent development. And one of the things that may be important is that conversations about parental beliefs is a very difficult conversation, and it should happen when the family is most comfortable speaking. This may result in the need for a translator or somebody who is very familiar with the family's culture and can help the teacher understand the cultural implications of adapting to the family's belief system and the family's cultural beliefs and adapting to the school. These beliefs are often informed by culture as well as education and acculturation. For families of young dual language children, there are specific beliefs regarding practices around toileting, pacifier, feeding, and uses of punishment. And Latino children are typically dependent on their caregiver for meeting their basic needs for a longer period of time than is culturally customary in the United States. Um, and so helping parents understand some of the beliefs and helping schools understand some of the beliefs without making judgments, knowing that both formations lead to highly social competent students. And it is, you can have a conversation with parents at this, maybe at home, but in school we're working towards this. And that is perfectly acceptable to have the conversations about what is important in school and what is important at home. Um, in order to help our students and families with this effective two-way reciprocal and respectful conversation, and helping parents understand some of the developmental consequences while respecting perspectives. And this will once again enhance the relationship. So when we're going to look at the next concept of immigration and transnationalism, this is important for early childhood educators to understand because of the challenges and stresses immigrant families face. The immigration process, separation and reunifications, the changing network of relationships, segregation, and identity formation, and that there's a growing awareness regarding the stressors faced by immigrant families and their children. Many of the themes identified in their work are relevant for early childhood education, such as understanding all the processes that our families are facing. And programs might need to use a translator and other forms of visual communication to reach these families. And in short, just be aware of the stresses of language families face. And especially if it is a refugee student or it has a student who has experienced trauma and separation. So documentation status also it leaves a huge effect on children. So migrant children and their families need special attention from educators to make families um, work more positively with schools. There's a really interesting paradox of immigration suggesting newcomers fare better despite adaptation of social economic challenges. This could be because of the severe conditions that families have left. And when they're coming in second and third generation, they may start to feel some of the stresses of socioeconomic challenges, leading to more of an understanding on behalf of the school. Transnational families is a different dynamic, but it is also understanding that separations of children and parents have been found to cause emotional and behavior problems with families. Um, and academic difficulties. So be aware that many times the separations will cause the same insecurity of children and less secure forms and attachments. Okay, so how do we support and work with families? So we look at the 6 types of parenting involvement: parenting, collaborating, communicating, decision making, volunteering, and learning at home. And so we would begin by collecting and providing information. support strategies for developing dual language children, promote structure and ideas for family involvement, establish reciprocal relationships through regular supportive communication, what we've talked about throughout the session. So at the end of this, if you want to learn more, you can contact us at catholic@bcu.edu. There is a lot more research and researchers that are working on this continuously. So thank you and have a great day.